Jack Monroe had always appreciated the silence. That was the point of Evergreen Hills, an HOA-controlled suburb with matching fences, lawn-length regulations, and a no-nonsense policy about noise after 6 p.m. A quiet, orderly life. No surprises. That's what he paid for, which is why the envelope stopped him cold. It was there on his welcome mat at 6:14 a.m. on a Monday. Pale ivory, thick as cardstock, unaddressed. No stamp, no name. Jack paused, mug of black coffee in one hand, the other, hovering above the envelope like it might bite. Eventually, curiosity won out. He slid a finger under the flap and pulled out a shimmering save-the-date card. Gold lettering, embossed paper, a photo of a beautifully decorated backyard adorned with string lights and white chairs. At first, he thought it was just a flyer, until he saw the house. His house. The image on the card was unmistakable. His back patio, his trimmed hedges, the old oak tree he had been meaning to trim for months. Except in the photo, it looked like a magazine. Shoot. Perfect lighting, staged furniture, even someone's golden retriever lounging near his koi pond. Jack turned the card over. "We're so excited to share this special moment with you. Join us for Mia and Tyler's wedding. Evergreen Hills, 102 Clear Creek Way, September 14th. That was his address. Jack stood there a moment longer, wind catching the edge of the card in his hand. Then he walked slowly to his kitchen, set the card on the counter and stared at it like it might change if he blinked hard enough. There had to be a mistake. He checked the mailbox. Empty. No RSVP envelope. No further instructions. Just that single, silent announcement. He flipped it over again, inspecting it for a joke. Maybe it was a prank from one of his buddies? But he hadn't been close with anyone since retiring early 2 years ago. Besides, who would spend this much on a joke? Still gripping the card, Jack stepped out onto his back patio. Everything was still there. The peeling deck, the aging grill, the hedges needing a trim. No chairs, no fairy lights, no dogs, and no bride. But someone had taken a photo, recently. He checked his backyard cameras. Nothing, at least nothing unusual. The system only stored the last 48 hours of footage unless he saved a clip. Nothing in that time stood out. No planners, no guests, no camera crews. But that picture existed. Someone had been on his property. His phone buzzed. It was an email notification from the HOA. Subject: Upcoming community events in coordination. Jack opened it, already uneasy. The message was long, wordy, the way all HOA memos were, but halfway through, one sentence jumped out at him. Please be advised. Due to our commitment to neighborhood unity, some residents have generously made parts of their property available for special events coordinated by the Evergreen Hills HOA board. Jack stared at that line. Some residents? He certainly hadn't volunteered. He clicked reply. I just received a wedding announcement for an event scheduled at my address. I am unaware of any such approval. Please clarify immediately. He hit send. Within 5 minutes, an automated reply came in. Thank you for contacting the Evergreen Hills HOA. A board member will respond to your inquiry within 3 to 5 business days. 5 days? Jack leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed. He looked at the card again. His home, his yard, plastered like a public park on a wedding invitation he never approved. And the worst part? That date, September 14th, was less than 3 weeks away. Something wasn't right, and Jack Monroe was not a man who took kindly to being ignored. Jack arrived at the Evergreen Hills HOA meeting precisely 7 minutes early. Not because he wanted to, but because he wanted to see who else showed up and how they acted before the meeting began. The community center was a recycled brick building that once served as a church, now retrofitted with fluorescent lights and folding chairs that squeaked when anyone dared to shift their weight. The HOA meetings were rarely attended by more than a handful of residents. Most people in Evergreen Hills just trusted the board and didn't ask questions. That was their first mistake. Cheryl Bancroft, the board president, sat at the head table flanked by her usual entourage. 3 aging board members with polite smiles and vacant stares. Cheryl was composed, powdered, and wielding a clipboard like a gavel. She greeted Jack as he entered, her lips barely moving. "Jack, lovely to see you. You're early." "Something urgent came up," Jack said. "Thought I'd clarify a few things." "Of course," she chirped, as if he'd said he was there to donate cookies. "We'll begin shortly." The meeting started as usual. Budget items, lawn fertilizer guidelines, trash pickup reminders. Jack waited, watching Cheryl skim her notes until she said the magic phrase, "New business." Jack stood. "I'd like to address an issue regarding unauthorized use of private property, specifically my property." The room quieted except for the dull hum of an old ceiling fan. "I received a wedding invitation," Jack said, holding up the gold-trimmed card like it was evidence in a trial. "It lists my backyard as the venue, without my knowledge, without my consent." Cheryl gave a short laugh, a deliberate one like she'd practiced it. "Oh, that. Yes, it's been in the works for months. You may not have realized, Jack, but your yard is technically part of what we designate as Community View Space B. The bylaws allow us to coordinate events that reflect positively on Evergreen Hills. It's really quite an honor." Jack narrowed his eyes. "You're saying I don't own my backyard?" "Oh, you do, technically," Cheryl replied, flipping her clipboard to a section marked in blue. "But per Article 7, Section 12, which was updated last year, properties adjacent to community easements may be used for board-sanctioned events, with appropriate notice." "Notice?" Jack snapped. "This isn't notice, this is a damn invitation." Cheryl's smile thinned. "Now, Jack, let's not get emotional. We tried reaching out." "No, you didn't." "Well," she said, clearing her throat. "Perhaps." The mail was delayed. "Regardless, the bride has already planned everything. Rentals are scheduled, catering's confirmed, and you didn't even ask me." "Jack, sometimes community spirit requires a little flexibility." There it was. Community spirit. The phrase people in Evergreen Hills used when they wanted you to shut up and take it. It was the HOA's catch-all defense, the bureaucratic equivalent of "because I said so." From the corner of the room, someone murmured, "He has a point." Cheryl's head snapped toward the voice, her smile suddenly brittle. "The matter is closed," she said. "The board approved it unanimously. Let's move on." But Jack didn't sit down. He stood still, the invitation hanging from his fingers like a loaded weapon. "You've got a wedding scheduled in my backyard. I hope you realize that comes with risks." Cheryl's tone cooled. "Is that a threat, Mr. Monroe?" "No," Jack said. "It's a promise." He sat slowly, eyes locked on hers. The room buzzed with discomfort, neighbors glancing between them like tennis spectators waiting for the next serve. Cheryl quickly moved the meeting along, but her fingers gripped her clipboard tighter than before. Jack left before the meeting ended. As he stepped into the night, cool air brushing against his face, he thought of the phrase "View Space B." Sounded harmless, almost poetic. He knew better now. They didn't just want his space, they wanted his silence. But Jack Monroe had just decided to give them noise instead. Jack didn't sleep much that night. He kept waking up at every sound. A car door slamming, leaves rustling, the distant barking of a dog that didn't even live on his block. By sunrise, he was back in front of his monitor, reviewing the camera footage from his backyard. He had 4 cameras, one facing the back door, one on the side gate, and 2 covering the corners of the fence. But none of them showed anyone taking photographs or placing decorations. No crew, no drone shots, just birds and the occasional squirrel. It didn't make sense. Yet the photo on the invitation, the one of his backyard decorated for the wedding, had clearly been taken without his knowledge. At a perfect angle, in perfect light. And that golden retriever? Jack didn't own a dog. The footage only went back 48 hours, unless something was flagged and saved. And he hadn't flagged anything. They had been careful, very careful. Jack walked the perimeter of his yard with a clipboard, just as the HOA loved to do, only this time with purpose. He examined his fence for signs of tampering. One slat near the back was looser than he remembered. It wasn't broken, just gently pulled from the frame as if someone had slipped through and reset it. He made a note. Then he checked the side gate. Scratches near the latch. Fresh. Someone had been in his yard. More than once. That evening, Jack visited the county clerk's website and began digging through HOA filings. Evergreen Hills had hundreds of pages of bylaws, amendments, updates, and procedural votes. He cross-referenced each file with the HOA meeting dates, and that's when something strange happened. Article 7, Section 12, the clause Cheryl referenced about Community View Space B, didn't exist in the official documents stored with the county. He checked again. It was missing. Jack opened the physical copy of the bylaws the HOA had handed out the previous year during the fall newsletter bundle. There it was, plain as day. Same section, with language about community, easements, and board-sanctioned events. He held the two versions side by side, the county's record and the HOA's newsletter. The text was not the same. His version had been altered. A chill ran up his back. Someone had doctored the bylaws, and Cheryl had used that version to justify turning his property into a wedding venue. Jack printed both copies, stapled them, highlighted the discrepancies. Then he placed them in a labeled folder marked Fraud, HOA, and slipped it into his fireproof safe, right next to his passport. It wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was something bigger. Power, control, abuse. He went to the garage and pulled down an old cardboard box marked Security Gear. Inside, a pair of high-range motion sensors he'd never gotten around to installing. And something better, his backup hard drive recorder, one that could store 90 days of surveillance footage continuously. By midnight, his property was wired tighter than Fort Knox. Any entry, any motion, any flashlight beam would be captured, logged, and time-stamped. Let them try again. Let them step onto his land. This time, Jack would be watching. Just after 2:00 a.m., his phone buzzed. Motion detected. Rear corner of the yard. He sat upright and tapped into the live feed. A flashlight beam flickered briefly near the back fence. Then gone. The figure was quick. No face visible. But the camera caught the motion, the shape, the way they ducked behind the hedge and crawled back through the loosened slat. Jack replayed it 3 times. Then he smiled. They were scared now. Good. Because Jack Monroe wasn't just some grumpy retiree anymore. He was a man with evidence. And soon, the whole HOA would learn what it felt like to be caught breaking their own rules. Jack showed up to the next HOA meeting dressed in a freshly pressed polo, his lawn care ball cap pulled slightly forward to shade his expression. He smiled. Not too big, just enough. The meeting was in full swing when he arrived, late on purpose. He offered a small wave to Cheryl Bancroft as he took a seat in the back. She paused only slightly before continuing. And we're thrilled to confirm that Mia and Tyler's wedding will proceed as scheduled. Thanks again to everyone who has helped make this a reality. Polite applause followed. Jack clapped too. Cheryl glanced his way. Hesitation. Confusion. The corner of her mouth curled upward, but her eyes flickered with wariness. She was trying to figure out what had changed. He gave her a subtle thumbs up. Let her think he had given up, that he was on board. Let her relax. Jack stayed quiet for the rest of the meeting. No objections, no grandstanding, just nods and smiles. When it adjourned, Cheryl approached him like a cat circling a dog she wasn't sure was asleep. Jack, she said, voice lilting, glad to see you're embracing the event. I know it felt sudden, but I assure you it'll be tasteful. Classy, you won't even notice it's happening. Oh, I'm sure I will, Jack replied. She laughed too loudly. Of course. I mean, you'll be our VIP neighbor. A special part of the big day. I've actually been thinking, he said casually, about updating the backyard. You know, fresh look before the guests arrive. Cheryl's smile froze. Updating? Yeah, old patio's uneven. Deck boards are rotting. Thinking about tearing it all out. Maybe do some grading, maybe install one of those rock gardens. Nice timing, right? Start next week. Her eyes twitched. Well, Perhaps after the wedding? I'm sure the contractors could wait just a bit. Jack leaned in just enough for her to catch the glint in his eyes. You said I own the property, right? Technically? Her jaw tightened. Technically. Then I suppose I can do whatever I want with it, technically. Before she could respond, Jack tipped his hat and walked off, leaving her standing under the flickering community center lights, jaw slightly ajar. The next morning, Jack made calls. Not to lawyers, not yet, but to contractors. Ones he trusted. Not corporate landscaping crews, but demolition specialists. Men with excavators, rebar cutters, and a casual disregard for decibel limits. By Thursday, 3 different trucks had arrived on site. One carried concrete breakers. Another unloaded dump containers. The third, surveying tools. Jack stood with the foreman, pointing to the yard. I want it gutted, he said. Everything, down to the root, and I need it noisy. The man grinned. You expecting neighbors to complain? I'm counting on it. That evening, Jack received a knock on the door. HOA board member Leonard Frome, the soft-spoken one with the ironic handlebar mustache, stood on his porch, looking uncomfortable. Jack, Leonard said, rubbing the back of his neck. Cheryl asked me to come talk to you about the backyard. Jack stepped aside. You want to see the plans? Leonard hesitated, then nodded. Inside, Jack laid out blueprints, soil tests, and the official demo permit, all signed, sealed, approved by the county. Starting Monday, Jack said. Full tear down. But the wedding? Jack raised an eyebrow. Did you all not say the yard was community view space? Well, I figured I'd help improve the view. Leonard paled. She's going to lose it. Good, Jack said, folding the plans. Tell her I'll be serving coffee from my porch. She's welcome to bring earplugs. By the time the first bulldozer arrived, Jack had set out 3 lawn chairs and a cooler filled with lemonade. He watched as the concrete cracked, the patio broke into pieces, and the once manicured yard turned into a battleground. And he smiled, because the HOA wanted a show. Now they were going to get one. The rumble started at exactly 7:01 a.m. on Monday morning. It wasn't a distant hum or polite engine idle. It was the full-throated roar of a concrete breaker drilling into stone, shaking windows up and down Clear Creek Way. Birds scattered. Dogs barked. Sleep was shattered across the block. Jack Monroe sat on his porch with a steaming mug of coffee, earbuds in, playing Beethoven's Ode to Joy. He watched, calmly, as his backyard became a demolition zone. The old patio, gone in minutes. The, koi pond, already drained and cracked open, and the cherry on top, a 6-foot-deep trench along the eastern fence, marked by caution tape and rebar stakes, right where the caterers were supposed to set up. At 7:45 a.m., Cheryl Bancroft arrived in heels, sunglasses, and panic. She marched through Jack's side gate. He had intentionally left it open, and waved her arms like she was directing traffic at a crash site. What in God's name is happening here? She yelled over the clamor of jackhammers. Jack paused his music and removed one earbud. Backyard makeover, he said cheerfully. Didn't want the wedding guests stepping on loose stones. Cheryl's jaw dropped as she surveyed the wreckage. The lawn was gone, the flower beds uprooted, a dust cloud hanging like fog. A bobcat loader beeped as it backed toward what used to be the gazebo. You can't, this is the week of the wedding. Exactly, Jack said. Good time to get things freshened up, lot of foot traffic expected. Cheryl gritted her teeth. This is sabotage. No, sabotage would be if I waited until the vows to start the power saws. This is just poorly timed construction. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a stapled packet, a cease and desist letter, complete with HOA letterhead, and multiple bolded words. Jack didn't even look at it. I have permits, he said, filed with the city, approved. You know how they love when people actually maintain their property. I can have you fined. Jack leaned closer. Go ahead. Just make sure your niece's guests know the HOA backed a fraudulent wedding on a residence land without consent. I've got copies of the real bylaws. Want one? Cheryl's lips curled like she tasted acid. Jack added, You could always move the wedding. To where? Everything's booked. The caterer, the tents, not my problem. Behind them, a concrete slab slammed into a dumpster with a thunderous crack, as if punctuating the conversation. Cheryl stormed out, sunglasses hiding the panic spreading across her face. She didn't look back. Jack didn't expect her to. The queue. Next few days were blissfully loud. By Tuesday, wedding rentals had started arriving. Tables, floral arches, a photo booth, but no one dared set up. Not with cement dust coating the air and workers cutting through tree roots like butter. The HOA's group chat was in meltdown. Neighbors were divided. Some were furious about the noise. Others whispered admiration. You hear about Jack Monroe? One jogger muttered to another. Legend. Is it legal? The second asked. Jack made sure the permits were publicly posted on his fence, laminated in plastic. On Thursday, a small TV news crew rolled up in a van. They didn't interview Jack. He waved them off. But they filmed the chaos, caught Cheryl, pacing beside her niece who was openly sobbing while holding a tool gown in a garment bag. The headline that aired that night, Retired homeowner stands ground as HOA turns backyard into wedding war zone. On Friday, Jack's contractor handed him a cup of coffee and grinned. Want us to take a break this weekend? He asked. For the wedding? Jack looked over. The gutted land, piles of dirt, sharp rebar, orange cones, exposed wiring. The only thing missing was a danger, keep out sign. No, Jack said. I want you here bright and early. Let's make it loud. The foreman raised his cup. With pleasure. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops of Evergreen Hills, Jack returned to his porch, sat in his favorite chair, and set an alarm for 6:55 a.m. sharp. Tomorrow was Saturday, wedding day, and Jack was ready to be the best uninvited host anyone had ever seen. The sun rose on Evergreen Hills with a brightness that felt almost cruel. Saturday, September 14th, wedding day. At exactly 6:55 a.m., Jack Monroe was already on his porch. Freshly brewed, coffee in hand, Bluetooth speaker softly playing Sinatra's That's Life. He watched as the first of the wedding vendors pulled up, followed by the florist's truck. And then, the expression on the driver's face when he stepped into what looked like the aftermath of a battlefield. Gone were the pristine hedges and manicured lawn. In their place, deep trenches, jagged concrete slabs, rebar spikes, and a backhoe idling near what used to be Jack's koi pond. Dust clung to everything. Even the air seemed heavy with grit. Across the street, a white limousine arrived. The bride, Mia, Cheryl Bancroft's niece, stepped out wearing a sleek, lacy gown and an expression of hopeful confusion. Her bridesmaids followed, pastel dresses clashing horribly with the industrial wasteland ahead of them. Jack raised his mug in greeting. Morning, he called. You folks lost? Cheryl emerged next, her mouth already moving before she hit the sidewalk. What the hell is this, Jack? Yard renovations. Told you. Deck was a hazard. He gestured broadly. Had to remove it all. Can't have anyone tripping in heels, right? A bridesmaid squealed as her shoe snagged in a coil of orange extension cord. Another vendor slipped trying to drag a table around a muddy patch, nearly dropping a 3-tier wedding cake in the process. Mia stared at the mess, her perfect bridal expression collapsing into a full-body scream. You said this would be beautiful. Cheryl's cheeks flushed a dangerous crimson. Jack, we had a contract. Not with me, Jack said, slowly walking toward her. And if you're referring to that little HOA clause you forged, I'd stop talking before someone sues you. For fraud. Cheryl froze. Excuse me? Jack pulled a manila folder from the porch table, the same one he'd shown Leonard days before. I've got the original bylaws from the county, and your fake ones. He smiled. Color-coded. You're bluffing. Am I? Jack motioned toward the street, where a small crowd of neighbors had begun gathering, phones raised, some even streaming. You really want to test me in front of them? Cheryl's mouth opened, then shut, then opened again as if searching for a script. Mia burst into tears. The string quartet, confused and clearly unpaid, stood awkwardly near the driveway and began packing their instruments back into velvet cases. The officiant tried to give Cheryl a pep talk. The groom stood blankly as if trying to mentally teleport elsewhere. And Jack? Jack just watched it all, arms folded, a serene grin on his face. At 9 a.m. sharp, his crew arrived and fired up the backhoe again, beep, 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 reversing straight through what was meant to be the ceremony aisle. The engine roared as it tore up a rotted tree stump, splattering the white chairs with a generous coat of mud. Splatters hit the hem of Mia's dress. That was the final straw, she shrieked, loud enough to echo. I'm not getting married in a fucking construction site. She threw her bouquet straight into a dirt pile and stormed off down the street, heels clicking furiously on the pavement. The groom hesitated for 3 long seconds, then quietly followed. Cheryl stood there surrounded by chaos. Tables askew, muddy linens, curious neighbors watching every moment unfold. She looked for the first time small, powerless. Jack leaned in. I warned you, Cheryl. You thought this was about a wedding. He shook his head. It was about respect. She didn't reply, just turned slowly and walked away, back to the limo, back to wherever she had to retreat and lick her wounds. By noon, the guests were gone. Vendors packed up in silence. The yard? Still torn to pieces, but to Jack it had never looked better. He went inside and opened his laptop. Next stop, the county office. It was time to expose what Cheryl had done, not just to him, but to everyone in Evergreen Hills. By Monday morning, Jack Monroe wasn't sipping coffee on his porch. He was seated across from a sharp-eyed real estate attorney named Carla Voss in a glass-walled office downtown. She specialized in HOA abuse cases, and within 10 minutes of reviewing his folder, her eyebrows had lifted. Did you say this clause was presented as legally binding? She asked, flipping between the real and fake versions of the HOA bylaws. That's what Cheryl claimed. They used it to justify hosting a wedding on my property without consent. Carla snorted. Well, she's in deep. Jack leaned back, in the chair. Deep enough to drown? Maybe not drown, Carla said, but she's definitely not going to float. That afternoon, Carla filed a formal complaint with the County HOA Oversight Committee, attaching copies of the forged bylaw. Jack also submitted an anonymous tip to the local paper, complete with scans of both versions of the HOA document. By evening, a journalist had already emailed back asking for a quote. Jack declined. He wanted the story to grow on its own, untraceable, at first then unstoppable. He didn't have to wait long. On Wednesday, the Evergreen Hills neighborhood app lit up like a Christmas tree. Someone, Jack didn't know who, leaked the headline before the newspaper even printed it. HOA president accused of forging bylaws to host family wedding on private property. The article dropped online an hour later. It quoted unnamed residents, referenced the now viral wedding disaster footage, and cited discrepancies between official county records and HOA distributed documents. The accompanying photo? Cheryl, red-faced and visibly sweating in her Sunday hat, standing in the middle of Jack's shredded yard. By that night, the HOA was in meltdown. A group of residents started organizing a special board meeting, which, per the HOA charter, could be called by a third of the community if the president was suspected of misconduct. They had more than enough signatures within 24 hours. The meeting was held in the same community center where Cheryl once reigned unopposed. But this time the folding chairs were packed wall to wall. Neighbors who'd never attended before showed up in pairs, murmuring, reading printouts of the article. Phones were out. Cameras were recording. Cheryl sat alone at the board table, flanked by 2 of her remaining loyalists. The other members had resigned quietly. One of them was Leonard Frome, now seated in the audience, avoiding her eyes. When Jack entered, the room fell quiet. Not hostile, just watchful. He walked up to the mic, his folder in hand. I wasn't going to speak tonight, he began. But since most of you are here, I figured I'd at least tell you what I've learned." He didn't shout. He didn't grandstand. He simply told the truth. He explained the forged clause, the missing public vote, the wedding planned behind closed doors. He laid out the timeline, the recordings, the county filings. Then he held up the laminated permit for his demolition like a badge. "I didn't tear up my yard to be spiteful," he said. "I did it to make a point. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought none of us would. But we all own our homes. Not just the property, the space, the boundaries, the right to say no." A quiet hum of agreement ran through the crowd. Cheryl stood to respond, but the murmurs grew louder. People began asking questions, demanding votes, citing bylaws, the real ones. Within 20 minutes, the board voted to place Cheryl on temporary suspension pending an investigation. She left through the side door without a word. Jack didn't smile. He didn't need to. The damage was done. And this time, not to his yard. The next morning, a neighbor dropped off a homemade pie with a sticky note. "Thank you for waking us up." Jack chuckled and placed it on the kitchen counter. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't alone in his neighborhood. The following week, Jack Monroe's phone buzzed incessantly. Calls from neighbors, emails from the HOA office, even a few messages from local media outlets asking for interviews. But the most unexpected was a formal letter delivered by hand to his doorstep, embossed with the official Evergreen Hills HOA seal. Jack tore it open. Inside was an invitation, or rather, a summons. "Dear Mr. Monroe, the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association hereby request your presence at the upcoming annual board meeting with a proposal to nominate you as a new member of the board of directors. Your leadership during recent events has been exemplary, and the community believes your voice is essential for moving forward." Jack blinked, rereading the note. He wasn't sure if this was an olive branch or a strategic move. Either way, the neighborhood wanted him. That evening, Jack sat on his porch sipping iced tea and reflecting on the whirlwind of the past month. He remembered the shocking discovery of the forged bylaws, the frantic, furious wedding day, the HOA's collapse under its own misdeeds, the surge of neighbor support, some old friends, many strangers. The invitation felt like a culmination, or a new beginning. At the next board meeting, Jack walked in wearing a crisp button-down shirt and a calm resolve. The room was packed more so than ever. The mood was different, hopeful, energized. Cheryl Bancroft was nowhere to be seen. Instead, new faces filled the seats. Some were old-timers, others young families. They all wanted change. When Jack was called to the podium, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes, neighbors who had grown tired of hidden agendas and underhanded power plays. He cleared his throat. "Thank you all for trusting me. I don't take this lightly," he began. "This community isn't just a place on a map. It's people, real people with real homes and real lives." He paused, letting the words settle. "I'm here to serve, but also to listen, to make sure that things like what happened with that wedding never happen again." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. Jack proposed immediate reforms, transparent meetings, updated bylaws accessible to all homeowners, an open complaints process, and a committee to oversee community events with proper notice and homeowner consent. The board voted unanimously. For the first time in years, the HOA meetings ended with handshakes, smiles, and genuine collaboration. Weeks later, the yard was still a construction zone, but this time, Jack's plans weren't about sabotage. He had hired a local landscape artist to design a community garden, a peaceful green space where neighbors could gather, plant flowers, and host picnics. It was his way of healing the wounds left by the conflict. One sunny Saturday, the garden officially opened with a block party. Kids ran barefoot over soft grass. Adults chatted around benches, and Cheryl Bancroft's name was nowhere in sight. As Jack watched the laughter and light spill over Evergreen Hills, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope, the last thing Jack did that day was walk to the garden's centerpiece, a large stone engraved with a simple phrase, "Community is not given, it is built." Jack smiled, knowing that sometimes it takes breaking the old to build something new, and sometimes that starts with a demolition.